Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. Actually, late morning. Good late morning, listeners. It is a lovely summer day here in suburban Chicago, and I realized I let 10 days go by without publishing an episode of the podcast. That's not good, especially when I'm already behind schedule. This is episode something like 336, and by the end of this month, I should be at 350 if I want to finish the year at the pace I like to set. Now, 14 episodes in a month is more than normal, but if I really push for 12 this month and 12 next month, that'll put us back on schedule. So we'll see how we do. But anyway, I hope that you are having a lovely day. It is firmly summer here in suburban Chicago now. The temperature is probably the high 70s or low 80s Fahrenheit, and it is just a lovely day. Hopefully this walk outside won't result in a sunburn for me. I think 45 minutes outside without sunscreen should do okay. Wouldn't want to go too much longer than that, and I'm going to try to be in the shade as much as I can. So I thought I have been posting things on TikTok lately. You can find me there as Wombat929. I know that's a surprise that I would use that username there. But if you're interested in hearing what I have to say about board games in very short bursts, but also, I don't know, random videos of cats and stuff, you could follow me over there. And I posted a comment the other day after my wife and I played a game, and people were very excited about the game, but then mad that it turns out it's not available. So I thought that I would increase that excitement by doing an episode here on the podcast. So today I'm going to do a Message from the Deep Obsession. So Message from the Deep is a podcast feature that I don't do very often. I looked through the podcast history. It looks like I've done it about 6 times, maybe a little bit more if I haven't been that careful about naming it such. But the idea of Message from the Deep is that I take a game that I know very well and I talk about it thoroughly. You could call it a bit of a review, a more proper review than the shooting from the hip episodes that I do, because I'm reflecting on the game from the perspective of someone who's played it many times. I think I have 8 plays of Obsession in now, which is, I think, enough to say that I have a sense of the give and take of the game. And so I thought that I would talk about it a little bit while I'm walking around today. I know you always like to know where I'm going when I'm walking around. Today I'm going to the hardware store to buy a couple new light switches. Very exciting. Okay, so here we go. Let's start with theme. First off, Obsession is a game published by Kayenta Publishing, which is a independent publishing house run by Dan Halligan, I think is his name, who is also the designer of Obsession. This is the only game they've published so far, although he has indicated that he's working on other games. It is currently unavailable for purchase, sorry about that, but he has indicated that he is doing a new print run of the game that will be available sometime in August is his hope, although worldwide shipping being what it is, who knows when that will actually happen. All right, here we go. So let's start with theme. I know I've talked about Obsession a few times on the podcast before, but I'm going to cover it as though you haven't encountered it. Obsession is a game about Victorian England, or even Elizabethan England, probably Victorian England, in which you play a wealthy family looking to to find a suitable match for your children. The idea is your family used to be quite prominent, then went into some harder times. Your estate maybe is a little dilapidated or a little bit less than you'd like it to be, but you've recently come into some new funds and you're looking to improve your lot and you're standing in the community. So over the course of the game, you are going to improve your estate. You're going to hold events, and these improvements and these events will raise the reputation of your family and hopefully draw the interest of one of the Fairchild children, who are the niece and nephew of the wealthy Fairchild couple, or the wealthy Fairchild ladies who live. They're the most wealthy family in the county. The game feels a lot like if you were to make a board game out of Downton Abbey or Pride and Prejudice. That's kind of what the game feels like. You are navigating the social niceties of the landscape. You're managing a large household staff. You are building connections with prominent people. You're avoiding connections with embarrassing people, and you're worried constantly about your reputation. So that's the theme. You know, it comes through really well throughout the game. It is one of the most thematic Euro games I've played. It's got a lot of flair in all of the elements that you're doing. You're constantly sort of talking about things as if you are within that context of those stories that you'd expect to find in the example text that I mentioned. So in terms of theme, if you think the idea of a game that evokes some of the same ideas as Downton Abbey would be fun to play, here you go. That's what the game is. All right, so let's talk gameplay a little bit. How does the game actually work? So in the game, you start with a country estate with an estate with relatively small number of features. You have 5 rooms of 5 different types. You have like an essentials room, a servant's room, an estate, a sort of like something on the estate. You have the grounds, and then you have luxuries. I think those are the 5. They're in different colors, and everybody starts with the same 5 tiles. Now on your turn, you're going to pick one of those rooms which represents an activity that you are hosting in your estate. And then you have a hand of cards that represent the people who live at your estate, but also friends and well-wishers that are connected to your estate in various ways. And when you hold an event at your estate, as a result, you get favors from the people who participate in that event. So for instance, usually the patriarch of your family, if he participates in an event, then you collect rent from the estate, you get some money. If you have a friend who is well known as a good storyteller or something, when you have them over for an event, then you actually get to draw another card, you make another connection. You have another person who would come to a different event at your estate. So the way that it actually works is you pick one of the rooms you want to use, and you set it in a particular spot. It says, I'm using this room. And generally that room will have a servant who has to participate in order to use that event. So like if you're going to do something in the main dining room, you probably have to have the housekeeper, who's the sort of the head of the female staff, participate. So you have to take your housekeeper token or meeple. You have like these little, I guess they're not meeples, they're wooden cutouts. Meeple is the word I guess that's used, but they aren't meeple shaped. They're individually shaped. But you have your housekeeper, and you would put that on your on that tile. And then for each guest that you bring, some of the guests, they just come by themselves, like the matriarch and patriarch of your family. They generally don't take servants. But then you may also have some members of your family who require servants, or guests that require servants. So you may have a male guest who requires a valet, which is these little green meeples, or you may have somebody who requires a footman to help them get around. And generally each card explains why they need that. But so you have the staff that you have to put on the cards of the people participating in the event and on the tile. And then you get the favors from all of those. So you might gain some reputation, you might gain some money, you might gain more guests into your hand from the decks. And then once you've gathered all those things, then you put all those servants into the used servant area, exhausted servant area, and then you put the cards into discard. Once you've done those things, then the last thing you can do on your round is to make a new addition to your estate. So you can build another room by going into the market and spending money that you've earned. Now the money is pretty tight in the game. You generally don't start with any unless one of the families starts with a little bit. And you earn the money by holding events, and then you spend that money on rooms. The way the game works out, there are 20 rounds in the full game, and you're probably buying rooms in at least 2/3 of them. Most games I've played, around 2/3 of the time we're buying a room. But the market goes up in price, so the lower the tile is on the board, the less you have to pay for it. And then you add that tile to your estate. It's another room that you have. And then here's the really clever part, I think. After you buy the tile, and after you hold an event on the tile, when you return it, you flip it over to its second side, which shows that you've used it once. And with most tiles, the value of that tile for end game scoring goes up once you've used it once, like the community knows about it, and so you've gained some reputation from it. There are some tiles where the value goes down or the value changes, but often the event that you hold changes as well. Like maybe I'm not remembering this exactly, but maybe you have a front parlor where you can hold a game of whist where you have 2 guests originally, and then once you flip it over, you have 3. That would be an example of a way that you might use the tiles. So after you've then purchased a room, then you reset, and then on your next turn, all of the servants that you used on the first turn, they move into resting, so you can't use them on the second turn. So you always have a 1-turn delay before you can use them again. which is an element I really like. In fact, so much that my very first game design, which is still kind of hovering around in the dark recesses of my mind, used that same mechanism. You have a servant. If you use them, they go in the exhausted pile, then they go in the resting pile before they come back into your hand. So now mine are all cards in that game, but it's fun to see that mechanism somewhere else. Yeah, and then once you have finished your turn, then it's the next person's turn. Once everyone has a turn, then the round is over. You move the round marker forward. Every 4 rounds, then there is a kind of society. It's the end of the society season, and then the Fairchilds, the family that everyone is sort of hoping will choose them, they choose which family from the community they like best based on which tiles you bought. And so you can see what tiles they're going for. Now I'm leaving out a lot here. There are objective cards that you can get. You can hire more servants. There's all sorts of stuff. But I think in terms of describing the basic gameplay, that's the ebb and flow of it. Once everyone has finished a turn, then then you move on to the next round. Once you've gone through, I think in the beginning it's 4 rounds, and then it's 4 rounds per season. Once you've gone through 4 rounds, then the season ends, and the game takes place over 5 seasons if you're playing the full game, which I recommend. The base game is probably a good learning opportunity, especially because the game takes a little bit longer, but really Obsession works best in the full game, I feel. So that's the gameplay of Obsession. I want to take a moment here to talk to you about a new Kickstarter project from my friends at XYZ Game Labs. I am involved with this Kickstarter, so this is I guess you could call it a paid commercial, except I'm not getting paid directly. I'm advertising a thing I've worked on. But anyhow, XYZ Game Labs is introducing a new series of pocket-sized games called Quarks. These games come in a small plastic box that fits easily in your hand or in your pocket. And inside the box, there are a variety of different things, including tokens, little boards, as well as cards. So the idea is to introduce a line of pocket games that have just more than just cards. The Kickstarter promotes 3 different games. We have Zoo Your Z, a family level bluffing game, not entirely dissimilar from Coup. We have a lovely little card laying garden themed game called Cultivate. And we have a social deduction bluffing game called Bait and Switch. All 3 are interesting examples of what you could do with a sort of pocket-sized game. It's a pretty good deal. The games are $12 a piece, or you can get all 3 for $30. So that's a $6 discount. If this sounds interesting to you, or you've always wondered how you could support the podcast, for which I don't ask for donations or put commercials on or anything like that. To be honest, my intent to monetize the podcast was to occasionally put on commercials for projects I'm involved with. So if that gives you an extra incentive to go check out the Kickstarter, please do. Just search for Quarks Season 1 on Kickstarter, or you could go to xyzgamelabs.com/quarks. That's QUARKS. Thanks for taking the moment to listen. Next, I'd like to talk about the art and design in Obsession a little bit. Obsession's art and design is thematic. It's focused on developing the idea of the game. You have all of the guests who are given an elaborate amount of character through the thematic descriptions of them and their elaborate names, like Viscountess de Saint blah blah blah. They're all really evocative that way. The images are all old black and white photos that look like they come from the late Victorian era. So that works really well. Develops the theme. That said, the rest of the graphic design in the game is its weakest point. The house board that you have is functional. It works fine, but it is clearly, I would say it's missing the professional flair that you might hope for in a finished product. And I think that is just a matter of the level of skill of the game designer, or of the fact that this is an indie publication. The box also looks a bit amateurish. The cover is, like, the cover image itself works, but the layout and everything just feels a little more indie, a little less polished. That said, I've played plenty of published games from reputable publishers that have not great graphic design. And I will say, nothing in the graphic design gets in the way of playing. This isn't an issue where, say, I've played games where they're leaning so hard into the need to be language independent that the game becomes hard to play. That is not the case with Obsession. All of the elements in the game are consistent and well crafted. The iconography is easy to understand. I don't ever find myself being confused by it. I suppose the most confusing bit might be the fleur-de-lis. One fleur-de-lis represents a casual guest. Two fleur-de-lis next to each other represents an elite guest or prestigious guest. And then the little sideways lion represents prestige, your reputation. And so when you earn 2 reputation, you get 2 little lions. I think to a new player who hasn't yet internalized those symbols, the little lion and the fleur-de-lis might be confusable, but the publisher does a good job of putting all of the elements where they need to be. So like your reputation track, which is a circle that goes up over time, has a big lion in the middle. So if you earn the lion, you have to do the thing related to the lion that's on your board. Similarly, the fleur-de-lis are represented on the backs of the cards that you would then draw from. So the game does a good job of developing those elements. So in terms of theme, top notch. In terms of art and design, could use a bit more of a professional touch, but eminently playable, and it's the sort of thing that you notice the first time around, and then after that, just kind of fades into the background. Next, I wanted to talk about complexity in Obsession a little bit. Obsession is a pretty complicated game when it comes down to it. Like many complicated games, once you understand the rhythm of the complexity, it isn't that bad. But on a first teach or a first playthrough, there are a lot of things to remember. So I'll just give you an example to help you kind of see the way that the complexity emerges in the game. When you go to play an event, first you're going to take the tile for that event and you're going to look at its prestige rating. It has a number in the corner, 1 through 6, and then you have to look at your family's prestige. If your family's prestige reputation isn't at the level of the tile, then you can't play that event. So let's say you might have an event, a hunting party with a prestige level of 3, but your family might have a reputation level of 2. You may have bought that hunting party tile, but you can't use it until you're at reputation level 3. Then once you've played that tile, then you have to assign staff to it. Now here's a place where the graphic design succeeds. The image on the tile matches both color and shape the meeples that you're using to do the design. So the butler meeple looks distinct from any of the other meeples. And so you can use either color or shape to guide which staff you need. And that's true any place that the game calls for you to use staff, which works out really nicely. So you need to make sure you have the right staff to host the event. Then you have to play cards out of your hand based on the required attendance at the event. So it might say to family. Okay, so that means you have to play 2 cards that have your family crest in the corner, of which you have 4 or in one case 5 to start. Or it might say 2 guests, in which case you have to play 2 people who are not family. Or it could say 2 gentry, which means any 2 cards. Or it could say 2 gentlemen, or 2 ladies, right? So there's a mix of different things it might say, and the cards don't actually carry those keywords. Like it doesn't, like a card for a woman doesn't say ladies on it somewhere. You just have to recognize, oh, this character is a woman. This being in the Victorian era, there are not people represented as having anything other than male or female as their gender, and it's presumed that the gender they present in the game is the gender that you're going to use to characterize them. But so then you have to have in hand the people who could go to that event. Then for each person, you have to look in the upper left corner and see what prestige rating they have, because as the game goes along, you'll acquire these prestige guests, people who are really well known, but they'll only go to an event at your house if your family has enough prestige to invite them. So you might acquire a prestige guest of 5 into your hand while you still have a reputation of 3, and then you just can't use that guest until you've raised your prestigiousness to 5, or your family's reputation to 5. And then for each guest that you put down, some of them will have staff requirements in the corner, and you have to put those staff members from your available staff onto that thing. You have to do all of that for each event that you do, and then you gain rewards from both the gentry who visit the event and from the event itself, and then you have to put all the stuff away. So there's a fair amount of sort of bureaucratic moving around of things in the game, and once you've played it, even 2 or 3 rounds, it becomes pretty self-explanatory. But that said, my wife and I still have at least once a game where one of us will try to play an event or a guest who exceeds the prestige rating that we're allowed to play. And that just gets more complicated as you get into like the expansion or as you get some of the tiles. So there are like servant tiles that allow you to break some of the rules about how often you can use a servant. So it is a complex game. If you go back and listen to my 3-part episode about depth versus complexity, I would put this game at medium depth, high complexity. Something to be wary of if you prefer games on the lighter spectrum or you haven't played a lot of complicated games yet. Obsession might make itself a bit too complicated. That said, I feel like it is very approachable for being a complex game because the theme works so strongly. Like, you know why this lady wouldn't go to this event because your family isn't prestigious enough yet. So it's easy to remember these rules because they fit the narrative that you're creating. Or here's like another example. In the expansion, there are pawns, there are meeples called cooks that you can hire. And a cook, when you use them, you put them on an event alongside whatever required people are there for the event. So let's say I brought up the example a couple times, a fox hunt. Let's say you're having a billiards party. And the billiards party is an event of 3. You can, let's say the billiards party is an event with a prestige of 3. You can put a cook on it, and then you can hold that event even if your family's prestige is only a 2. So the cook raises your family's prestige level 1 notch when you put it on. The cook also allows you to bring guests of up to 2 higher prestige than your family would normally allow. So let's say, again, your family is a 2, that event is a 3. Let's say you have a prestige guest of 4 in your hand. If you put a cook on that event, that 4 guest is going to be willing to come to this 3 event, even though your family is only 2, basically because they've heard how great your cook is and they want to try the food. So that kind of fits. There are a variety of different especially in the expansion, these pawns that can do a variety of different things. In the base game, there's an under butler who can do a number of different things. And so that's a place where the complexity comes through. The game also challenges you to be thinking about a lot of different elements. I haven't really mentioned the scoring of how the game works, but like I said, each tile is worth some points. Once you've used it, it's worth a different number of points. Each guest in your deck at the end of the game is worth some points, including a number of guests who are worth negative points because they are bad for your reputation. And so those guests you have to work to get out of your deck by the end of the game because you don't want them bullying your score down. There are also bonus cards that you can get that give you points. And then you get raw points just for achieving certain levels of reputation. And I would say with experienced players, if you don't end the game with your family's reputation in the maximum field, you're probably going to lose. Because if you're at reputation level 9, it's worth 45 points. If you're at reputation level 8, it's worth 36 points. That's a huge swing. Plus, being at reputation level 9 also then gave you access to other things probably. And so, yeah, as you go along, it's really hard to win without that high reputation. So all of that is to say that this is a really interesting, fun game that is very complex, especially for the theme, which maybe the theme is a little more welcoming to people who aren't playing really heavy games in other ways, that there are people who might think that sounds fun, but then the complexity gets through there. All right, 2 things I want to talk about before I wrap up. The first is the expansion. The game, actually, there are 2 expansions. When the game first came out, he included a small box expansion called the Wessex expansion, which added a 5th family to the game. When I think pretty much everybody who got the game also got that expansion. There might have been some people who didn't. But I believe that the reprint, the Wessex expansion, is just folded into the game. He doesn't have it as a separate purchasable item anymore. But then he also did a Kickstarter last year for the Upstairs Downstairs expansion, which added, like I said, these 4 additional servant types that all provide auxiliary benefits. It also added a number more cards and tiles and cleaned up a few sort of rules goofs. I really like the game with the expansion. I think the added elements added by those other servants is well worth the additional complexity. It gives you a lot more flexibility as you're playing to play things out because you like your cook lets you bring guests or hold events that are higher level than you normally are, which gives you acceleration there. The hall boy helps you earn more money. The useful man helps you save money or do a bunch of different things. And the head housemaid helps facilitate holding events of different types. All of these are excellent additions, and this last game that I played, I made sure to get one of each of those figures, and it certainly paid off. So if you get a chance to play Obsession and you are thinking about whether the expansion is good for you, I have nothing but good things to say about it. I really like it. It does also add a sixth family, and while the game does come with enough components that you could play 6 players, the designer does not recommend that. It says that 6 is too long. I think maybe even 5 would be too long. I've played with 3 and the game was pretty long, but it works very, very well at 2. There also were, with the second edition of the game, there were a few tweaks to how the tiles moved that I think balanced the game a little bit more and reduced the luck factor. And that's the last thing I want to talk about today with regard to Obsession is the luck factor. There is a bit of a luck factor in this game. There are elements that allow you to ameliorate the effect of luck in some ways. Like, for instance, there are some things that you can get that allow you to draw 2 cards when you're getting a new guest and pick one. Or like the rebalanced objective cards allow you to winnow the objectives down as you go along rather than having to just pick at the beginning, which is nice because you don't always know what cards you're going to get or what tiles are going to come out. But at the heart of it, there is a level of randomness to the game that is not avoidable. There's randomness in which cards you draw, there's randomness in which tiles are going to come out when, and as a result, not only is it sometimes hard to plan, but sometimes you will make or break objectives or elements of the game just based on when things came out. Or let's say you have a turn lined up where you're about to get a whole bunch of money, and your opponent buys a modest or relatively normal tile, and then a really good tile comes out because of that. Well, you might be able to get that really good tile because your opponent happened to set you up for it. And it's just luck that you're able to get it. Similarly, like in our last game we played, I had 2 objective cards that depended on 6 different tiles coming out, and only 2 of the 6 tiles came out the whole game. Not much I could do about that except spend extra actions to refresh the market, which I just didn't want to do. So there are a variety of ways that there are a number of ways the game challenges you or disrupts your ability to easily control everything the way that a more hardcore Euro would, but ultimately it's super fun, and like I always have a good time even if I end up coming on the short end of the stick in terms of luck. So if you think this sounds like a game for you and you'd like to check it out, I'm sorry to say it's really hard to get a hold of right now. After I posted on TikTok, somebody said it's $375 on eBay. Don't pay that for it. What I would do is go to Board Game Geek and subscribe to the forum for Obsession. Dan Halligan, the designer and proprietor of Kayenta Games, has said he's got a reprint in the works and it's coming in, and he should have plenty of copies available for purchase, both in retail and direct from him when that happens. So if you think this sounds interesting, just put a note in your Board Game Geek to subscribe to that game, and you can get it when he brings out the reprint, which I strongly recommend. So have you gotten to play Obsession? What other games does my description remind you of? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know in the comments in the forums there what you think of this game or other games like it. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.